The SERAPIS CIPER, In the Shadow of John the Baptist. Episode 3. Shadows of Gnosis. Miriam could scarcely believe how crowded the outpost had become overnight. A swirl of new faces, journalists, curious onlookers, even a few self-styled prophets populated the dusty yard. She watched from a window as Father Benedict and Dr. Abboud tried to maintain order, explaining for the 100th time that the site was not open for tours, that no second scroll had been found, and that they would release no further details until more lab results were in. For a moment, she considered stepping outside to help corral the crowd, but she was too absorbed by the new data on her laptop screen. The ink analysis from the local lab had arrived, detailed spectrometry results that indicated once again the primary text was composed of period-accurate ink from the late 1st or early 2nd century. Yet the margins and a few suspicious letters contained faint traces of modern compounds. It suggested, quite strongly, that the parchment had been altered at some point after antiquity. She zoomed in on a high-resolution photograph. The faint, tiny differences in the script's handwriting around certain words were subtle but present. The suspect words included references to Jesus deceiving John, or John claiming messiahship. Particularly inflammatory phrases, in other words, might have been added later, skillfully integrated into an authentic text. Her eyes flicked to Father Benedict, who had just entered the room. His usually calm demeanor was rattled by the chaotic scene outside. "Benedict," she said, beckoning him over. "Look at this analysis. The scribal hand is nearly identical throughout, but these specific words, deception, betrayal, Messiah, show microscopic differences in brush pressure and ink composition. It's as if someone used an ancient formula for the main text, but then had to retouch or expand a few words later, maybe employing a slightly different batch of ink. It's unbelievably meticulous." He bent over her laptop, studying the magnified Greek letters. "So, if I understand this correctly, the core text could be genuinely ancient, discussing John the Baptist's followers and their conflict with early Jesus followers, but these key lines that escalate it into a full betrayal narrative might be modern forgeries, inserted to stir controversy." She nodded. "That's how it's looking. If so, we're dealing with a hybrid text, authentic foundation, doctored to push a sensational claim. This lines up with the lab's note about a synthetic polymer at the edges. It could be left over from an attempt to seamlessly graft in new fragments or re-ink partial words. If done carefully, the text might fool even thorough inspections, at least at first." Benedict ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "That would explain why there's such a frenzy now. A certain group, the Circle of Serapis or whomever, wants to use real antiquity as a Trojan horse for these inflammatory lines. By weaving them together, they ensure the academic community takes it seriously. Then, once it's out, the sensational angle spreads like wildfire, calling into question the fundamentals of Christian tradition. And possibly fueling a Gnostic revival," Miriam added, eyes darkening. "Or at least an anti-orthodox wave, which might be their ultimate goal. They've probably set their sights on driving a wedge between the faithful and the Church, playing into an already polarized world." Father Benedict straightened. "We need more conclusive analysis before we can go public with these findings. Otherwise, they'll dismiss our claims as a church cover-up." Miriam agreed. "Let's send a full set of samples to a second independent lab, someone with no ties to the Vatican or local institutions. My colleague in Berlin can do a multi-layered chemical analysis. It'll take time, but at least we'll have an unbiased second opinion." He nodded. "Let's do it. But we also have only a week before Cardinal Vieri tries to take the parchment to Rome. We'd better move fast." She began preparing the request for Dr. Eisler, the Berlin-based expert. Meanwhile, Father Benedict stepped outside to quell the throng of reporters. Dr. Abboud was finishing a quick press update, adhering to the statement they'd agreed upon. No definitive authenticity claims yet. Ongoing tests. Stay patient. The heat was punishing, the crowd impatient. Photographers snapped pictures of Father Benedict, whose Roman collar marked him as a clear church authority, which only stirred more pointed questions about the Vatican's involvement. One persistent journalist shoved a microphone into Benedict's face. "Father, do you deny that the text declares John the Baptist felt betrayed by Jesus? Are you covering up a major blow to Christian orthodoxy?" "I neither confirm nor deny anything about the text's contents," Benedict said calmly. "We're still analyzing. We have made no final conclusions. That's all for now." The journalist continued to press, but Benedict gently but firmly turned away, rejoining Dr. Aboud. They retreated inside the outpost, leaving the journalists milling about outside the gate, thirsty for any scraps of sensational detail. Inside, Miriam found them in the main hall. Dr. Aboud had an exasperated look on his face. "I just got word from the Antiquities Authority. They're under huge pressure, both political and social, to let the parchment go to Rome sooner. Apparently, Cardinal Vieri's diplomatic channels are in high gear." Father Benedict grimaced. "We must push for our tests. How soon can we send these samples to Berlin, Miriam?" She gestured to a sealed envelope on the table. "Already done. I asked a trusted courier to take them. He's leaving tonight, by plane to Munich, then a train to Berlin. I'm not risking an international shipping service. The Circle of Serapis might intercept. We need absolute security." Dr. Aboud nodded. "Good. Once Berlin's lab weighs in, we'll have a stronger case to keep the text here for a while longer." Benedict paused, then quietly confided, "I fear that the more we delay, the more we risk something drastic happening. The break-in attempt won't be the last, especially if these conspirators suspect we're onto their forgery. They might escalate their efforts." Miriam folded her arms. "I've considered that. But letting the parchment vanish into the Vatican archives without thorough neutral analysis would be a betrayal of the academic process and a surefire way to feed the conspiracy theories." They reached an uneasy consensus. Push forward with all due caution, maintain the official statement of neutrality, and expedite the Berlin analysis. That evening, with the outpost finally settling down, Miriam had a rare moment of calm. She stepped outside, watching the desert sky bleed orange and purple as twilight descended. The crowd of reporters had mostly dispersed, promising to return in the morning. Local police had placed barricades around the site, controlling entry. The wind was cooler, carrying hints of night-blooming shrubs. Father Benedict approached, quietly standing beside her. His eyes drifted across the horizon. "You know," he said softly, "I never expected my vocation to land me in the thick of a global controversy over possible biblical forgeries. Sometimes it all feels surreal." She gave a short, gentle laugh. "In my wildest dreams as a grad student, I hoped to find a single new fragment that might shed light on early Christian or Jewish history. But this? It's like a thriller novel." She paused, then added somberly, "Except it's real, and people's faith, careers, and safety are on the line." He looked at her carefully. "Have you given thought to what happens if the entire text, or the crucial lines, turn out to be genuine? I mean, it's a remote possibility, but still a possibility." She exhaled, eyes fixed on the last glimmer of sunlight. That would mean a radical reinterpretation of John's role. It wouldn't be the first time a new discovery shook up biblical scholarship. But if an authentic early Christian group believed John was the Messiah and Jesus was some rogue disciple, it would challenge centuries of theology. Not to mention, it might validate or strengthen Gnostic readings, fueling this modern movement opposed to Orthodox Christianity. He nodded. "The Church has weathered storms before, but the ripple effects on ordinary believers, that worries me. And if this modern Gnostic group weaponizes it for their own agenda, we could see a wave of disillusionment or confusion." They fell silent for a moment, the desert wind whispering around them. Finally, Miriam spoke. "But right now, the evidence points more strongly to partial forgery. Someone is orchestrating this to cause maximum disruption. We just have to prove it." And I suspect the circle of Serapis is behind it, or is at least co-opting it. Benedict's expression grew troubled. Yes, when I was in seminary, rumors floated around about certain fringe sects. Some venerated the figure of John or Judas or Mary Magdalene with Gnostic leanings. Back then, the idea seemed almost quaint. Now, with technology, they can amplify their message far beyond old pamphlets and secret meetings. I makes forging ancient texts frighteningly plausible. A hush fell between them. The sky had grown fully dark, the stars winking into view. Finally, they both turned and walked back into the building, determined to press on. Duty beckoned. The next few days unfurled like a slow boil. Local labs continued verifying each line of the parchment. Preliminary results indicated that the betrayal references, those that cast Jesus as an opportunist and John as a betrayed Messiah, were almost certainly late additions. Everything suggested a well-executed tampering that used real ancient materials. Meanwhile, no further intrusions occurred at the government facility, though security was now extremely tight. On the fourth day, something else erupted on the internet. Scholars in various corners of the academic world reported receiving excerpts from a so-called second parchment purporting to continue the same narrative. These digital images, shared under anonymous accounts, showed Greek lines with an even more shocking claim. John the Baptist openly cursing Jesus for leading people astray and forming what the text called the false path of the kingdom. The style mirrored the first parchment's suspicious lines, replete with phrases about deception and betrayal. Miriam and Dr. Abbott spent hours trying to trace the origin of these digital images. They cross-checked the script's authenticity with known papyrus backgrounds, but it was nearly impossible to ascertain from a mere JPG. Scholars on social media argued passionately. Was this a new discovery? A forgery? A Gnostic text from the 2nd century? Many believed it was an outright hoax, especially given the timing. Yet others demanded that the second parchment be recognized as proof of a suppressed Johnite tradition. It's orchestrated, Father Benedict concluded grimly. They're flooding the discourse with unverified documents, stirring confusion. The average person can't tell genuine scholarship from digital fakery. This is the hallmark of a targeted disinformation campaign. Miriam's frustration mounted. I've never seen anything like it in biblical studies. This is reminiscent of political or corporate espionage, where massive data leaks and false documents appear all at once to muddy the waters. They're weaponizing the internet to create a swirl of contradictory narratives. By the time we present the real data, the public will be too overwhelmed to know what to believe. That evening, as she sipped a stale cup of coffee, her phone buzzed with a message from her colleague in Berlin. Arrived safely. Preliminary scanning underway. We'll keep you posted. She felt a brief sense of relief. At least those critical samples were out of immediate danger. Maybe Berlin's conclusive analyses would be the definitive stake through the heart of this forgery attempt, assuming it was a forgery. On the 6th day, 2 days shy of the cardinal's scheduled removal of the scroll to Rome, Father Benedict knocked softly on Miriam's door at dawn. Her hair was tousled from fitful sleep, and she rubbed her eyes blearily. Benedict, she yawned. What is it? He stepped in, a sense of urgency about him. Doctor, Abbott just received a cryptic tip that a hidden chamber in the same desert region might contain relevant artifacts, possibly early Christian or Johnite. We're leaving at once to investigate. She blinked, pulling her ponytail tighter. From whom? He shrugged. Anonymous. But the instructions were detailed. Coordinates about an hour's drive north of the original cave. Her gut clenched. Could be a trap. He nodded. Or it could be a lead on the rumored second parchment. The tipster specifically claimed this site would expose the forgery. She mulled it over. All right, but we need a plan. We can't just walk into a potential ambush. We're taking 2 local police officers with us for protection, he said, eyes flicking to the open door. Also, Dr. Aboud's assistant, Sahar, who's an experienced local archaeologist. If it looks unsafe, we'll turn back. 15 minutes later, they had loaded supplies into a pair of dusty 4x4 vehicles. The early sun was already scorching the horizon, yet the desert air was faintly crisp. Dr. Aboud was at the wheel of the first car with Father Benedict beside him. Miriam rode in the second with Sahar, while two uniformed officers sat behind them, rifles propped at the ready. They drove off, leaving the outpost behind, news crews dozing in parked vans none the wiser about their unannounced expedition. Miriam felt a flutter of excitement and dread. She recalled countless times she'd ventured into the desert for legitimate archaeological surveys, but never under such cloak-and-dagger circumstances. They travelled for nearly an hour, following rough terrain. The coordinates led them to a remote wadi fringed by tall, jagged cliffs. Sandstone formations loomed overhead, shadows creating a patchwork of dark recesses. The second vehicle struggled over bumpy ground, and Miriam gripped the door handle to steady herself. "This is it," Dr. Aboud radioed from the lead car. He maneuvered into a narrow passage. The group exited their vehicles, scanning the towering rock faces. Each step crushed pebbles underfoot, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sahar checked a handheld GPS. Coordinates say another 50 meters that way. They trudged forward, hugging the cliff. Then Sahar spotted a faint trail, a rocky shelf that angled up a few meters. She motioned for them to follow carefully. The police officers went first, rifles slung over their shoulders, scanning the area for threats. At the top of the rocky path, they found a small plateau overlooking the wadi. The swirling wind kicked up dust around them. Carved into the face of the cliff was a narrow opening, partially collapsed. It looked ancient, but not obviously a constructed doorway, more like a natural fissure. "This is the only possible entrance," Dr. Aboud said, peering inside. "We can try to wedge through." Miriam and Sahar approached, pulling out flashlights. With some effort, they squeezed between jagged rocks, stooping to avoid overhead stone. Cool, stale air greeted them. The narrow passage led into a small chamber about 8 feet wide, possibly formed by ancient erosion or a minor rock slide that created an enclosed space. The floor was uneven, but mostly sand. Miriam's heart fluttered as her flashlight swept the area. At first, she saw nothing but bare rock, but then Sahar let out a soft exclamation. At the rear of the chamber, set against a rocky shelf, was a clay jar half buried in sand, sealed with pitch. Dr. Aboud carefully approached and knelt beside it. "This is reminiscent of the kind of jars that stored scrolls near Qumran," he whispered, though it might be from a different period. He gently brushed away sand, revealing more of the jar's shape. When it was clear enough, he produced a small trowel and chisel, carefully prying at the seal. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. Behind her, Father Benedict murmured a prayer under his breath. Finally, with a faint crack, the pitch seal gave way. Dr. Aboud eased the jar open, shining his flashlight inside. The beam revealed a rolled piece of leather-like material, darkened with age, edges frayed. "Another scroll," he said in hushed disbelief. "But it looks more like leather or animal skin, not papyrus." The small group exchanged looks. Everyone was on edge. One of the officers signaled outside, telling the other to stand guard. Dr. Aboud used both hands to lift the roll from the jar, placing it on a clean cloth. Miriam crouched to help, her gloved fingers trembling. She gently unrolled a small section, revealing lines of text in a style that might be Aramaic or Hebrew. "This is definitely old," Sahar said, wide-eyed. "But how old?" Miriam's flashlight trembled slightly. The text, in uneven characters, looked archaic. A quick glance suggested a liturgical or narrative structure. Some lines had the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, plus references to an anointed figure. But the script was different from the Greek of the other parchment. This was no direct match. As they examined it, Dr. Aboud announced, "I see references to water purification and mention of a man named Yohanan, which is Hebrew for John. Miriam's heart thudded. John again. But is this about John the Baptist or some other Yohanan? There must have been many. Let's see if there's anything referencing Jesus or a betrayal. Sahar knelt closer, scanning the lines. Here, she whispered. It says something like, the righteous one, teacher of righteousness, false prophet, parted ways. My Aramaic is rusty, but it might be describing a split or a division among followers. I see a phrase possibly translating to the fisherman's band or the Galileans in a derogatory sense. Father Benedict's eyes darted around. Galileans? That's often how early Christian sources referred to Jesus and his disciples. Could this be an older or parallel tradition? Another community that revered John above Jesus? Dr. Abboud nodded, face tense with wonder. Yes, it might be, but we must be cautious. We need to date the leather, analyze the ink. We might have stumbled onto a legitimate Johnite text that was never touched by forgers. Or we could be stepping into another planted hoax. Miriam, biting her lip, examined the shape and decay patterns of the leather. It seemed ancient, far older than the jar's pitch seal suggested. If this was legitimate, they had found a second text referencing the John-Jesus tension. But this time, it was in Aramaic or a similar dialect, not Greek. If it were a forgery, it was another layer of cunning, using a different language to deepen the apparent authenticity. Father Benedict closed his eyes, as though wrestling with the implications. If this new discovery is real, it might corroborate some core idea that John's followers felt overshadowed by Jesus. In early Christian history, you do see faint hints of that, but never a direct statement that John was the rightful Messiah. This text could push that boundary. They gingerly wrapped the leather scroll in cloth and placed it in a protective container. Doctor Abboud had brought along. Everyone was subdued, aware that they might be carrying an artifact of profound importance, or another Trojan horse. Their flashlights caught the swirling dust in the air, stirring the sense of stepping into a world that had been sealed off for centuries. Suddenly, a sharp whistle came from the passage entrance. One of the officers. Miriam's heart jolted. They hurried out, careful not to jostle their find. The guard outside was beckoning anxiously. "We've got visitors," he said, pointing down the rocky shelf. Far below, on the desert floor, 3 black SUVs rumbled into view, raising clouds of dust as they sped toward the plateau. "Does anyone know them?" Father Benedict asked, voice tight. The officer shook his head. "They're not police. No official markings." Miriam's stomach twisted. The circle of Serapis, journalists, smugglers. Possibly they'd been followed. "We need to go," she hissed. They scrambled down the rocky path and piled into their vehicles. Dr. Abboud placed the newly discovered scroll in Miriam's car, urging the officers to keep weapons at the ready. The black SUVs were rapidly closing in. Sahar floored the gas. The 4x4 lurched across the uneven desert terrain, Father Benedict bracing himself in the back seat. The other car followed close behind. A swirl of dust enveloped them as they raced to stay ahead of the newcomers. Miriam turned to look through the rear window. The black SUVs trailed behind, each bearing 2 or 3 figures in the front seats, silhouettes of men leaning forward with intense focus. "These guys aren't giving up," the officer next to Miriam growled. He checked his rifle. "We'll lead them away from the outpost, try to circle around to the highway." Sahar nodded, spinning the wheel. The vehicle bounced violently over rocks, and Miriam clutched the seat with white knuckles, heart pounding. She caught glimpses of the second 4x4 in her side mirror as Dr. Abboud tried to keep pace, dust swirling in his wake. The chase stretched on for several harrowing minutes. Occasionally, the black SUVs managed to draw closer, but each time Sahar took a sharp turn or banked down a small ravine, putting distance between them. By a stroke of fortune, the desert terrain became too rough for the heavier pursuers, forcing them to slow. Finally, with a last swerve around a steep ridge, Sahar guided them into a rocky defile, temporarily out of sight. When they emerged onto a more established dirt road, the black SUVs were gone, left behind in a haze of dust. Miriam exhaled shakily. Father Benedict reached for his phone. "We'll call for additional security," he said, "and we'll hide this new scroll in a secure location separate from the first. It's safer that way." "Do you think those were the Circle of Serapis?" Miriam asked, throat tight. "I suspect so," Benedict replied, gazing at the cloth-wrapped artifact. "They clearly knew we came here, and they were prepared." No one said it out loud, but a shared understanding threaded through the group. The Circle's resources were vast, their network wide, and they would stop at nothing to claim or destroy any evidence, real or fabricated, that advanced their aims. They arrived back at the government facility late in the afternoon, nerves frayed. The newly discovered leather scroll was hustled into a separate vault, guarded by a different detail of officers. Tense conversations followed with the Israeli Antiquities Authority, which insisted on immediate testing. Dr. Aboud argued that he and Miriam should begin preliminary analysis on site, verifying language, script, and a small sample for dating. The officials acquiesced on the condition that a fully documented chain of custody be maintained. Inside a secure examination room, under bright lights, Miriam and Sahar carefully unrolled the scroll on a sterile table. The writing was a mixture of Aramaic with possible Hebrew loanwords, reminiscent of some Qumran-era texts. Phrases referencing the faithful of John and the usurper from Galilee stood out. One line read roughly as, "He that was anointed in the womb was overshadowed by the fisherman's son." Another alluded to a sense of betrayal or resentment. They followed him, not the righteous teacher, sowing discord among the children of light. Reading those lines sent chills down Miriam's spine. Whether real or forged, the narrative was consistent with the notion of John's followers believing he was the rightful anointed figure. This second text had the potential to reinforce the first parchment's claims, unless both were manipulated by the same clandestine group. She and Sahar worked late, taking careful photographs and minuscule samples of the leather and ink. Dr. Aboud hovered anxiously, consulting references, cross-checking the script. Father Benedict kept watch near the door, occasionally updating them on the swirling crisis beyond. More reporters, more Vatican pressure, more rumored sightings of new Gnostic texts flooding the internet. In a lull between tasks, Miriam asked Dr. Aboud quietly, "What's your gut feeling about this text?" He sighed, glancing at the lines. "It looks ancient, and the language is convincingly first century or so. But after what we learned about the betrayal scroll's partial forgery, I'm wary. Perhaps the Circle of Serapis placed an authentic Johnite document here to be found, or they forged it with advanced methods. We can't assume anything." Despite her exhaustion, Miriam persisted for hours, scanning the script into a translation software tailored for ancient Semitic languages. The tool helped confirm many phrases aligned with early Judean syntax. Yet her mind kept returning to the question, were these references to John's messianic role truly from the time, or were they the result of cunning modern tampering? Long after midnight, she finally stopped. Her eyes ached from poring over the text, her thoughts a whirlwind of speculation. She found Father Benedict sitting in a nearby corridor, chin resting on his hand. "Any progress?" he asked softly. "Too soon to tell," she replied, sinking onto a bench beside him. "It might be legitimate, or not. The same question over and over." He gave a tired nod. "We'll do what we can tomorrow. Then the day after, Cardinal Vieri returns to claim the first parchment for Rome. I'm not sure if he'll demand this second scroll too, once he learns of it. That might spark a diplomatic standoff." She leaned back against the cool wall, letting her eyes drift shut. "It's a mess. One part of me almost hopes we prove they're fakes. It would at least quell the crisis. But if they're genuine, or partially genuine, the ramifications are enormous. And if the Circle is forging or doctoring ancient documents on a global scale, we may be at the beginning of something bigger than any of us realize." Benedict gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll keep going, Miriam. Cling to scholarship, to integrity. will unravel it. She opened her eyes and managed a faint, weary smile. Yes, step by step. Somewhere in the desert night, a breeze whistled through the facility's gates. Within these walls, the two scrolls, one Greek, one Semitic, lay under lock and key, guarded by armed men. Yet beyond these gates, in hidden labs and covert networks, lines of code and cunning artifacts might be churning out fresh illusions, all designed to erode the boundary between truth and falsehood. Before dawn, Miriam drifted to sleep in a cramped bunk, haunted by half-formed dreams of John the Baptist and Jesus standing at the Jordan's edge, voices raised in argument. In her dream, John's voice echoed with hurt, while Jesus' words were an indistinct murmur. The desert wind seemed to carry a single question: which one was truly chosen? She awoke with a start, uncertain of the answer, and fearful that the entire world might soon be asking the same thing. Outside, the last stars faded as a blood-orange sun crept over the horizon. In mere hours, everything they knew could change again.